Now let's start this bulletin in China, where Kenya's head of state, Uhuru Kenyatta, is making his first state visit as head of East Africa's biggest economy. President Kenyatta is due to hold talks with President Xi Jinping later on Monday. The Kenyan leader will be looking to propel bilateral relations with the Asian economic giant to a special partnership. That's the closest diplomatic collaboration between two countries. President Kenyatta is seeking greater cooperation with China, which is now considered to be its most important bilateral partner in infrastructure development, among other key projects in energy, the environment and technology. President Kenyatta, along with his high-power delegation, will be meeting Chinese business representatives, and economic agreements are expected to be signed at the conclusion of the talks. Now, President Uhuru Kenyatta arrived in Beijing on Sunday morning in his first state visit to China as Kenya's head of state. Discussions this week with China's President Xi Jinping and other government officials, as well as the China business community, will focus mainly on investment, infrastructure development, energy, technology and protecting Kenya's wildlife. President Kenyatta will also press for greater market access for Kenya's exports. Now, we'll take a look now at Kenya's relationship with China, which extends back for more than 5 decades. As we said earlier, this will be Uhuru Kenyatta's first visit to China as president of East Africa's biggest economy, and it comes on the 50th anniversary of Kenya's independence and the establishment of diplomatic ties between these two states. Now, a couple of China's major infrastructure projects in Kenya involve roads, energy and ports, and that includes the Nairobi-Thika superhighway and the expansion of the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. 80 to 90% of employees for these types of projects are local Kenyans. Now, China has also become Kenya's second largest trading partner, with bilateral trade volumes of about $2.84 billion. It's also invested $474 million in Kenya, becoming its biggest source of foreign direct investment. Now, strengthened cultural ties go way back to 1980, when Kenya signed an agreement for cultural cooperation, and today the Confucius Institutes attract thousands of Kenyan students. Lastly, in 2012, some 41,000 Chinese tourists visited Kenya, with President Kenyatta saying he wants to boost that figure to an impressive annual figure of at least 5 million annual tourists. Let's get the latest on President Kenyatta's visit to China. Su Yuting joins us now live from Beijing with the latest details from that end of the world. So can you tell us more about what's on the agenda during Kenyatta's state visit to China?
Yes, hello Ramanyang. A welcoming ceremony has been held to greet visiting President Uhuru Kenyatta. President Xi Jinping is scheduled to hold talks with Kenyatta this afternoon. The discussion is set to focus on improving Kenya's infrastructure, boosting tourism, deepening trade and economic relations, as well as maintaining regional peace and security. The two leaders will also explore how China and Kenya can cooperate more closely on international issues of mutual interest. Agreements on economic cooperation are expected to be signed after the talks. During his stay in China, the Kenyan president and his delegation will also meet representatives of the Chinese business community. Back to you.
Obviously, both these two countries do stand to gain from this visit, but from a Chinese perspective, what is the significance of Kenyatta's visit to China?
Yes, Kenyatta chose China as one of the first foreign countries to pay a state visit since his inauguration in April. His visit is very important for both China and Kenya. Both countries have new leadership, and new ideas, new opportunities are also being created to fit within the already established partnership. This year also marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic ties with China and Kenya. The two countries have benefited a lot from various cooperation, especially in the field of trade and investment. So China has become Kenya's second largest trading partner and the biggest foreign direct investment source, as you said before. That the Kenyatta's visit this time is expected to make economic ties with China much closer. Back to you.
Indeed, thank you very much for that. That's CCTV's Su Yuting over in Beijing, China, with the latest on the state visit by Kenya's president to China. Now, earlier on, in an exclusive interview, CCTV's Beatrice Marshall spoke to the Kenyan president, Uhuru Kenyatta, about his country's ties with its most important bilateral partner and his hopes from his first state visit to China.
I see a whole new world where we can cooperate on the international platform, as well as we focus on the reforming, for example, the United Nations to be more receptive and to have the voice the developing world heard much more succinctly. So I think it's all coming in, I think, at a time where we in Kenya are also looking at new prospects in terms of our new finds in minerals, in oil and gas exploration. So there is a lot of reason for us to really be much closer together as we look at our development agenda going forward. And I myself am quite excited about the potential that exists, and the fact that we are both leaders of the same generation who I think share a common vision for our two countries, and how we can play a much greater role on the international platform in much closer cooperation. We in Kenya also have a lot to learn from the Chinese experience, and we hope that the people that we will be with, including myself, will be able to learn from that experience as we continue to further strengthen the very good ties that we already have with the Chinese government and the people of China.
Right, let's move on to North Africa now, specifically to Egypt, which is entering its 6th day of a state of emergency, and where the political standoff between supporters of the ousted President Mohamed Morsi and the interim government and its supporters do continue. The country's defence minister, General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, has vowed to have a zero-tolerance policy towards any further political violence after nationwide clashes left more than 800 people dead in the last week alone. With the details, here's CCTV's Clementine Logan.
The standoff continues. Egypt's military leader General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi made it clear in his speech on Sunday that the army would not tolerate any further political violence. This after nationwide clashes left hundreds dead. On Saturday alone, fighting between supporters of ousted President Mohamed Morsi and police killed 79 people, according to government figures. In a bid to calm tensions, el-Sisi said there was room for everyone in Egypt's transition and that Islamists should be included in the country's politics.
We are reaching out with good intentions to all Egyptians, if it is good they want. If it is other than good that they want, then we are left with no other choice but to stand against this with all our strength and might to protect Egypt.
But the political standoff shows no signs of abating. On Sunday, scores of Muslim Brotherhood supporters turned out at one of Cairo's major intersections, demanding an end to what they call a military coup and the security clampdown that's resulted in the deaths of more than 800 people in less than a week. On the same day, Egypt's cabinet held an emergency meeting to discuss potentially banning the group. Now the Muslim Brotherhood is digging in its heels in anticipation of a harsher stance by the government.
We are for legitimacy and stand with President Morsi. We are opposed to the military coup. Those who murdered our brothers and sons and continue to kill are leading a failed coup.
Despite the ongoing unrest across the country, the military has said it will stick to its timetable, under which Egypt's constitution is to be amended and presidential and parliamentary elections held in 2014. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
Let's get some more details on the events in Egypt. Crossing over to correspondent in that country, CCTV's Adel El-Mahrouki. He joins us now live from the capital of Cairo. Adel, this really is a very strong statement from Egypt's Defence Minister, General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi. What reactions have there been from both sides?
Well, many are believing, who support the armed forces, that this is another call for the Muslim Brotherhood to rethink their position and their philosophy in continuing the rallies instead of letting down and join the interim transition. Analysts say that if the Muslim Brotherhoods do so, they have at least from 20 to 30% easily win the number of seats in the next parliament elections. And they believe they have a very good chance to remain very powerful and remain in the political scene. However, they warn that if the Brotherhood continue on this road, this might be an end to the entire political life of the Muslim Brotherhood. On the other hand, the Islamic group have responded today by announcing another series of rallies that will start in the afternoon here in Egypt. They will defy the curfew once again. Today's numbers are expected to be very big, much more than those yesterday. We expect a similar scenario to that of Friday. Massive rallies, they will gather in central points. The target today is to hold a press conference at the end of each rally, trying to communicate to the international world and trying to show that their protests are peaceful.
Indeed. We also have had quite a few reports of more violence right across Egypt. You've got incidents of prisoners who are thought to have died in an apparent attempt to escape during their transfer, and then about 25 or so police officers who were killed in an apparent ambush in the Sinai Peninsula. What more do we know about those two specific incidents?
Well, let me start with Sinai. It has been stated by the state's media that what has been happening is that too many buses going back to Sinai, the peninsula near a city in Rafah borders, which is Egypt's border with Gaza. And during their return from a vacation, some militants fired RPG rockets at their vehicles, which led to at least 25 dead and at least 3 injured so far. It came part of a series of attacks that have started and been going on in Sinai since President Mohamed Morsi was ousted on July 3rd. On the other hand, yesterday at night, the Egyptian authorities announced, as you said, the death of several tens of prisoners in an attempt of a breakout, according to the state. It first said that there's about 612 prisoners that attempted to flee a prison in Abu Zabal in Qalyubiyya city, which is part of Greater Cairo. And when the authorities were chasing and trying to control the area, about over 30 have been killed. And then another statement said that the 36 prisoners that have been killed or died, they were in a vehicle transporting them to prison, and then they attempted to flee, and this is where the attacks happened. The Interior Ministry stressed that they died from as a result of stampeding and using tear gas bombs. Also in response, the ministry has evacuated all local police stations from prisoners and moved them to a big prison facility to avoid this from happening again.
Indeed, we'll have to leave it there, though. Thank you very much for that update. That's CCTV's Adel El-Marouki in the Egyptian capital of Cairo. We'll of course have more coverage of the continuing crisis in Egypt right here on CCTV. Time now for a quick break. Here's what's coming up next. Silence of the guns. Liberians are celebrating 10 years of relative peace and stability. At 10:15 GMT, you're watching Africa Live. Let's take you to West Africa now, where celebrations are underway in Liberia. It's been 10 years since a peace deal was signed that ended that country's brutal civil war. And Liberians are now coming together to honour those who lost their lives and to commit themselves as a country to a far better future. With this report, here's CCTV's Kofum Renje from Monrovia.
A special service for a special anniversary. 10 years to the day since warring factions signed a peace deal to end a conflict that had devastated this country. For Liberia, it's a day of praise and thanksgiving.
And when we do so, He will bless us. And we do so in the memory of all of those who have suffered and who have paid the ultimate price for peace. May God continue to bless us all.
The conflict broke out in 1989, a struggle for power between rival political leaders. By the time it was over, an estimated 250,000 people were dead, around 10% of Liberia's population at the time. For many, the memories still hurt.
So they killed my father because he was in the army and they killed him.
Atrocities were common. This church, St. Peter's Lutheran Church, witnessed one of the worst. More than 600 men, women and children were killed in this church on the 29th of July 1990 during the civil war that lasted 14 years. Exactly 10 years after a peace accord was signed in Accra, Ghana, Liberians gathered here again just to reflect on the steps taken by their country since then. Many say it has not been smooth, but are hoping that things will get better by the day.
To be able to come back here on a day like today and celebrate, have this kind of celebration that we had, it just shows the tenacity of this nation and the people of this country, the resilience that they have.
Liberia has maintained the peace this past decade. It has a long way to go still to rebuild the country. But people say they are determined to learn from their past.
We should always try to strive for better things in life, but not to go out fighting among ourselves. We should try to listen to elders, because the more we listen, the more we avoid being rebellious against things. Yeah.
The celebrations continue on Monday. Kofan Ranger, CCTV, Monrovia, Liberia.
Still in West Africa, the insurgent Islamist group Boko Haram launched yet another attack in Damboa in Nigeria's northeastern region, killing 11 people. That attack came just hours after Nigeria's defense spokesperson said it was just a matter of time before the group would be completely wiped out.
Boko Haram's founder, Mohammed Yusuf, began to preach in Maiduguri against the ills of society like corruption. He gathered followers, and very soon the authorities took notice and moved against his group. Nigerian security operatives say he was shot while trying to escape from custody in 2008. Since then, despite a military crackdown on the sect, Africa's second largest economy has not known peace.
What has revealed itself now is that the state of emergency is unable to stop the attacks, and is also unable to stifle the insurgency. We have seen in the last few months a lull in the activities of the group. But it's clear that the group is surviving the state of emergency, is regrouping itself.
On the part of Boko Haram, that Boko Haram has likely committed crimes against humanity in its attacks on the civilian populations in Nigeria, as well as attacks on members of the security forces. We're also deeply concerned with regard to our findings on alleged abuses by members of the security forces.
However, in its 2012 report, Human Rights Watch insists that the terrorists should face the International Criminal Court.
We're glad that there's increasing understanding from both the Nigerian populace and the international community as to the professional competence and commitment of the Nigerian military and security agencies to manage the situation at hand. The statement recently by the International Court of Justice is encouraging, that they have seen the truth about our situation in identifying that the real people perpetrating crime against humanity are the terrorists.
While sheer force appears to be cowing the militants for now, the Nigerian government has been advised to adopt a carrot-and-stick approach if it wants to see lasting results. Maria Galang, CCTV.
Time for another short break. Here's what's coming up next in business.